Good afternoon, everyone. Glad you could join us. I'd like to welcome you to the Sector Speaker Series. This is a monthly webinar put on by the California Green Academy, also known as CalGreen. CalGreen's mission is to promote systems thinking and the triple bottom line in business, energy, and transportation. Some housekeeping: all attendees will be muted for the duration of the webinar so as to give all attention to our speaker. Further, if you have a question for Dr. Pierce during any of the webinar, please write the question in the chat feature. For the July 2018 webinar, we have invited Dr. Kenneth Pierce to speak to us about the transformational power of grant writing for a greater cause, especially in addressing social justice, transforming the lives of at-risk youths, as well as elevating the needed cause of racial equity and increased cultural understanding. Dr. Kenneth Pierce is the founder, CEO, and principal consultant of Pierce Consulting, LLC. His background includes professional services for social justice organizations and programs aiding at-risk youth. Through Pierce Consulting, Dr. Pierce is able to use his higher education and nonprofit experience, leading his team in thoughtfully crafting grant proposals, aiding in the mission of solving social problems such as education, poverty, violence, and police brutality. He believes the biggest reason why nonprofit organizations filled with great people often have poor results is due to their lack of much needed financial support. Dr. Pierce has earned degrees from Olive-Harvey College, DePaul University, and the State University of New York at Stony Brook, also known as Stony Brook University. On behalf of California Green Academy, we'd like to welcome Dr. Pierce for today's webinar.
Thank you. And I'd also like to thank you for the invitation. It was my pleasure to be here, and I'm very excited about the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about something that's a passion of mine, and hope that I can inspire others to see grant writing in the way that I do. And so with that, I'm going to give you a little bit of my screen. All right, so grant writing for a greater cause, class, status, and power. I'm calling this a guide. I want you to think about this when you think of the people with whom you choose to work and the importance of their work on the ground, all the stuff that happens on the ground that people desperately need funding for. I want you to keep in mind kind of some of the finer points that I'm going to present, and hopefully that encourages more people to work with smaller grassroots, maybe less funded nonprofits, and still find a great benefit to doing so. So my goal here is to advise you as to how you can best use your grant writing skills to fight for equity, the idea of equity. My general housekeeping notes, again, thank you for being here. Thank you for the invitation. If you do have questions, please do call me out in terms of being able to write down any notes that you want to send forward. Don't hold back, whether you agree with me, disagree, and don't worry about asking too many questions. I prefer to take them in as we go forward to kind of dispense with them and be able to move on with the presentation. So today's scope, what we're going to talk about is socioeconomic status. That is the impact that socioeconomic status has on long-term poverty, and the reason why that is slow to change, and how thoughtful grant writing can help kind of eliminate or begin to ease the impact of long-term, slow to change socioeconomic status issues.
So to begin with, one of our kind of principal theorists in the field of sociology is Max Weber. And Max Weber says about social stratification that there's three distinct dimensions. That is class, status, and power. And when we put those three dimensions of stratification together, that becomes what we refer to now as socioeconomic status. That is a composite ranking based on many dimensions of social inequality. But what I'm going to argue here is that class and status and power aren't all that separate in the first place. So when I think about what class someone is a part of that calculus includes their level of income and how long they've had that income and how that income was acquired. And when we think about status, we think about how much income does someone have, how long have they had it, and how it was acquired. And ultimately with power is a matter of both your class and status and your ability to get people to listen to or follow you. So I want to talk for a second about how those things are related and how they kind of continue to perpetuate a system of inequality for those who, a system of inequality in general, and how that inequality negatively impacts those who don't have the ability to kind of change their space. So with our class system, we can kind of debate the finer points as to what the cutoffs are. There's maybe three main models that people use in terms of defining class. I'm going to talk about the upper class, middle class, working class, lower class, and the poor. And again, this is social classes in the US. So this argument is only specific to the United States. In the US, a person is considered upper class if they are, in what we call this kind of top 5% of the population in terms of wealth. We're usually talking about wealth in excess of either income in excess of $500,000 or wealth in excess of $1 million plus, depending on how you're calculating upper class. But one of the things that's important about the class structure is that to be considered upper class, the money that one has to come from inheritance or your business, your grandparents' business, your parents' business, but it can't be kind of money that came from your work. So no matter how much you make, if it was because you worked to get there, you never be considered upper class. You can have all the money and all the same kind of trappings of the rich, but you won't be considered upper class if you personally had to work to achieve your wealth. And then with the middle class, which includes, in the way that we calculated, about 40 to 45% of the US population, with an average income of $116,000 to $205,000 a year, it is also split into an upper or lower. So we have the upper middle class, again, in that range. The lower middle class is going to be somewhere between $48,500 and $116,000 a year. Now, again, this is the majority of our population, or should I say a plurality of our population, fits in this wide range of middle class. So most, I'm going to say 45% of our population has an income somewhere between $48,500 a year and $205,000 a year. And so then we're going to talk about working class. A working class person may have an income slightly less than 48,000. Depends on the years they've been working and their level of expertise, etc. Someone who's considered lower class may have an income of less than about 26,000 in the U.S. And then poor, we have, we kind of split the poor into the working poor, who get up, work every day, but still only make, maybe 20,000 or less. They can't make ends meet. It causes, stress on their life in terms of their care, their health, care for their children, the ability to participate in activities outside of work, and the opportunity to improve themselves, etc. And so there are those challenges. So just to kind of set the groundwork, when I say upper middle, working, lower, and poor, these are the general frameworks that I'm using in this discussion. And here's why this is important. The lower class, if you will, makes up 20% of our population. 20%. So between the lower class and the middle class, we're finding ourselves with 65% of the population, only half of which of the middle class will make, on average, more than $116,000 a year. What that produces then, when you're not making a ton of money, the question is why? What happened to cause someone to be in a position where they're not getting the money that they feel like they need? And the quick go-to is, well, education. If someone had a better education, a higher education, they can get a better job. With that better job, they can get greater income. And so what you want to do is, just encourage more people to go to complete college, et cetera. And what will then happen is more people will have opportunity to earn higher incomes, and then we'll kind of fix our socioeconomic status issue, and inequality and inequity goes away. But that's far from true. As you see here, hopefully you can all make this out. So we see here, if we pay attention to the area on the bottom, let's see, right here, we have a situation where the numbers in red represent the percentage of the population with no diploma, no high school diploma. So we see for here in terms of white, Black, Hispanic, in 1980, 10% of whites had no high school diploma. And in 2011, that was down to 5%. So about half. And in 1980, 24% of Blacks had no high school diploma. And in 2011, that was down to 11%. So again, about half. In the Hispanic community, about 43% in 1980 had no high school diploma. And in 2011, that was only down to 30%. So we see that we're also, not only are we starting with smaller numbers of whites without a diploma, but they're cutting that from 10% to 5%, where at about 50%, which is okay. Black population is slightly less than 50%, and the Hispanic population is significantly less than 50% in terms of the improvement. But let's look at the other side. The other side here is the percentage of, so the green represents percentage of the population with a bachelor's or more. So if we go back to, again, in 1980, for whites, that was 27% of the population. That's improved to 40% by 2011. For blacks, that was 12% of the population, which has improved to 21%. And for Hispanics, that was 9%, and that only improved to 14%. So as we go through, white, black, and Hispanic, what we see is not only as we progress white, black, Hispanic through the list, do we see a lesser likelihood to have that high school diploma, but we see a lesser likelihood, which makes sense, to have the college degree. Obviously you would need some form of high school completion in order to qualify for that college degree. But we're seeing the improvements are being made only, and they're more marginal as we progress through this chart. And I'm going to get back to why this is very important in just a moment. So keep in mind these numbers, or even if you can't remember the numbers, just remember the level of improvement, especially on the college degree attainment side: 27 to 40, 12 to 21, and 9 to 14. And now let's look at women and men overall. So whereas men would be in 1980, 14% of men were without a degree, a diploma. There wasn't any significant change here, no significant change regarding the same measurement in 2011. But as we compare women in 1980 to women in 2011, we see some reductions here. And as we look at the gains, we see very small gains here. But when we compare women in 1980 to women in 2011, we see very large gains. So what we should expect, according to this chart, if not for this thing called socioeconomic status and its impact over time, what we should expect to see is that women's income is greater than that of men, because by and large, women are completing college more than men, and high school, college, all the way up more than men. And that we should also see that that blacks and Hispanics should be proportionate, the income should be proportionate to the percentage of the population that completes college. We'll get back to that. So here's what we actually find. What we actually find is, when we look at the number of employed people, this is 2010 data. In 2010, when we look at the total number of employed people and we figure out, well, what kind of occupations are they in, we see that Hispanic and black men are more likely to work in areas of construction, production, and service than are their Asian and white male counterparts. And we see the same, that women here are more likely, black and Hispanic women are more likely to participate in service occupations than are their white and Asian counterparts. So while we're seeing increased college completion, increased high school completion, we're still seeing inequity in terms of job types. And I don't think it is a stretch to argue that those job types will help determine the income. So in other words, what I'm saying is, if one is I don't know, let's say a street sweeper, we expect that person to make less than a person who is a pharmacist. So what occupation you go into is going to impact your income. Well, we are also led to believe that your income is going to be based more on your academic credentials. And I'm saying that's not the case here. Let's look at this chart. So now that we've looked at what kind of jobs people are going to, let's look at the wages attached to these jobs. So when a white woman is considered a management professional or otherwise occupied in a related field, she will earn on average $932 for performing her tasks. Whereas a black woman in a similar field, a similar occupation, will earn $812, and her Hispanic counterpart will earn $789. So what we're seeing here is, even if you are working the same job as someone in a different field, you are likely to earn less income if you are Hispanic or black, as opposed to whites and Asians in this model. And this is pretty much true across the board as we look at the numbers for white and Asian men and women in these occupations, sales and office, and we compare them to black and Hispanic. When we look at construction, etc., and we look at the earnings for construction here, if we look at transportation, even amongst lower paying jobs, blacks and Hispanics are earning significantly less, even at the lower tiers of work. And the same can be said with service occupations. So far, just a kind of a quick recap. What I am demonstrating here is that there are a multitude of factors that will determine your earnings. It is not simply your educational attainment, and it is not simply your gender, because even amongst women, for instance, we can see this variation of 1143 down to 789 for what is considered similar work. And this has an impact on net worth, the net worth of households. That is everything that you have that is of value minus everything that you owe, or all of your assets minus all of your debts, and here's your net worth in terms of your cash net worth. And so what we can see is that blacks have a much lower net worth than whites, and Hispanics have a much lower net worth than whites. So 8 times higher, was it 12 times higher here, 10 times higher here. And again, I am trying to explain why this is the case in terms of socioeconomic status. So far, what I've shown you is that there has been many gains made by minorities, and I'm including women in this minority group, in order to get higher education, in order to increase their income, and even with the additional education, that the income is not necessarily equal, because even in a particular job, people are getting paid differently. And I'm also now showing you that even in 2013, that there is a great disparity between between the net worth of the Black household and the Hispanic household as it compares to the white household. To go along with that, I'm going to paint a picture for who our average poor person is. The average poor person. On average, a poor person is someone who is under 18. And there's a reason for that. If you are under 18, you likely don't work. And so therefore, and you likely don't possess any significant assets. And even if you do work, you don't likely have the skill set that will put you in a position to earn a healthy income. As we just covered, African Americans are about 3 times as likely as non-Hispanic whites to be poor. Women are more likely to be poor than are men. And poverty tends to be concentrated in the middle of cities, big cities. So with that, I'm going to pause for just a second and ask, go back to my screen. Uh-oh. Where'd you guys go? So what I want to find out, it's not working. Desktop sharing, stop sharing, resume sharing, new share participants. All right. So what I want to try to find out from you guys is what's the explanation for this? Do you have any thought as to why it is that despite all the gains made, that the disparities are still as large as they are? Check in the chat box. If I don't get a response, I'm going back to my video.
All of the participants have been unmuted in case any of them want to speak up.
All right.
My immediate guess would be institutional racism.
I'm going to take it a step further than institutional racism. A legacy of classism. Let's go back to that, since I'll take your response and we'll go there. So how do I share? Go back to sharing my screen. Uh-oh. So, as we think about the relationship of all these aspects, what we find is, parents' education, family income, social capital, social class, and child's socioeconomic status are related in a way that is, I'll just explain the relationship. So let's think about, you have a parent, your parent grows up in a particular area, whatever area that is. Let's say uh, a poor side of town. Doesn't matter what race they are. They grew up in a poor side of town. This means that they may meet someone, as most people do, um, in places that they frequent. So, in other words, we tend to meet people in our own neighborhoods, in our own churches, in our own grocery stores, in our schools nearby. So if you came from a place that didn't have much and you met someone from there, then you probably met someone who also did not have very much. And now you two become a family. And if you both grew up with very little, there aren't very many resources that you can call upon as you move forward to rely on in order to kind of bolster your living situation. And so you get a house, perhaps either you rent or get a house in some area that is not too far from where you lived, in terms of, even if it's far in terms of distance, but in terms of status, it's not going to be very much different, um, for the fact that you just did not have necessarily the resources in order to make a market improvement over what your family offered you. What that means while you're growing up in this neighborhood, with parents who have very little, arguably, whose emphasis is now on work and making sure ends meet, maybe working multiple jobs. Perhaps there's no money for tutoring and extra programs, so you're not developing the social capital necessary to have, again, this market improvement. You then uh, you don't have maybe access to the kind of preparation that will put you in some of the better schools, or the programs that exist in these schools that will make you more competitive to some of the better colleges, et cetera. Um, Unless, again, there's a program perhaps that can facilitate where it is you're trying to go, based on your family background. And so then you as the child have been handed all of these things. You got a gender and a race and a class, that was handed to you. Your social capital was handed to you. There's nothing that you can really do about it at birth. You can only seek to make changes from where you are based on what you're able to do. But again, you're born into a social class. You're born into, you're gifted whatever social capital your parents had as you were born, and whatever their income is your income, because you're not able to work, um, or make a significant income. And so at now, as this young child, you have your options limited, um, in terms of, no different than anyone else. Your options are, again, handed to you from your parents. And now what you have, your only way out, is to try to figure out which of these things you can change. It is far easier, I argue, to change the education aspect, because in so doing, what you're able to do is move yourself not only up in terms of income, but up in terms of social capital. We recognize that not all jobs, for instance, are created equally, even jobs where more money might be at play. So one could be a union plumber and, pull a six-figure salary, but from a social capital standpoint, the fourth grade teacher making half of what the union plumber is making is going to have greater social capital due to the nature of that work. And then what that social capital does is it allows that person to expose their family to certain elements that will make them more likely to be chosen for other areas later. Remember, I pointed out initially that that no matter how hard you work, from today, unless you were gifted something from your parents, grandparents, great grandparents, that if you're working to become a billionaire, if you're the next LeBron James, if you will, or whomever, Oprah Winfrey, you are still going to be considered the working rich and never upper class. So there are certain things that are just beyond your control. And it's much easier, as we go back to some of the charts, the previous chart referring to the difference in household value or net worth, to have an increased net worth over time if generation over generation there is something that you're able to have when you start off in life that is not putting you at a point where you're starting from zero or from a negative financial starting place, if you will. So now, if we look at the model of the person, and what you can do in two generations, the parents who kind of determine the social class of the child who then goes to qualify themselves in whichever ways possible to start building up the income, to start trying to shoot for the house that is going to be worth more, that's then necessarily or more than likely to include the public school that's better funded, that has the programs that put the kids in the position to get funding, get better jobs, or start businesses or whatever the case is, that they're able to along the way, study for the GRE, study for the LSAT, study for the SATs and ACTs, and take summers and learn multiple languages and instruments and kind of culturally develop, that make them kind of further up the socioeconomic status ladder than you can ever hope to be in one generation. So this is a 2-generation solution. And so what I propose and what my company does in terms of this is we work very closely with schools and programs that provide resources to youth. It is these youth nonprofits, community organizations, ministries, elementary schools. We do daycare, preschool, what have you. And what we're trying to do is, in recognition that our problems are not going to be solved overnight through some infusion of cash, nor through one generation's ability to go complete high school or go to college, but that because the main block is kind of the years of being left behind regarding the acquiring and development of these socioeconomic status builders, that we're trying to infuse them at a young age to try to increase not just the number of students going to college, but the ones that are completing and getting degrees in those areas that are meaningful and are being more competitive, such that when they take the job to people, when they're taking a job at whatever the industry is, that they're not having to get the least of the pay simply because they were in a situation where they weren't qualified to kind of take the max pay in that relationship. So this goes back to the point I was making regarding how two people can work similar jobs and get a differentiation of pay that can't be explained any other way than, for instance, having the social capital to have, to be slightly more qualified, even if, we both got a degree. Now it's matters, where did your, degree come from, or maybe who you might have known to have gotten maybe a more favorable response, or who you may have known to have gotten more experience before this job search that gave you the leg up and the higher pay. Because also, as we do know, these pay gaps, they matter in the long run for that individual and for that family. As we think back to the net worth argument, that is, if you have a net worth that is 10 times lower than your white counterpart, and you consistently earn less, you'll never have this idea of equity. So it takes a holistic approach to deal with the equity issue. I do think it is an issue that is steeped in institutional racism, but I think that we're also at a point that we can make all the efforts to repair the racial aspects of this disparity, but we'll still be left with class issues that are going to take multiple generations to repair. And the sooner that we could prepare the younger among us, the easier I believe that the fix is, in order to kind of move forward and make sure that those children, our children, are able to have greater chances. So my point overall is that as we look at the cycle of socioeconomic status, that is, if you have things, it's easier to get things, and once you get more things, you don't ever, unless you take a loss or you voluntarily give away your things, there'll always be a group of people who have a leg up. And so what you want to do to kind of get yourself at that table is to put yourself as quickly as you can in the position to start acquiring things on your own. For now and for your family's future, that's important. As a part of that, education is important. It's key. It's not the only thing. Education by itself is not going to solve all of your generation's problems, but it will play a major role. The sooner that you can break the cycle of the lack of education and lack of pay, equity in pay, or equality in pay, then the sooner what we can do is think about addressing the macro level issue of equity, social equity. And so with that, I want to take any questions that you may have for the next couple minutes.
So everyone has been unmuted to raise questions. I have a quick question. So by trade and education, you are a social scientist. I'm just curious what brought you into grant writing?
So very good question. So I kind of took the long way to sociology, in that I was initially a political scientist, or on that route to becoming a political scientist in undergrad, and mainly interested in how it is that the decisions are made for certain people to get certain resources. What I recognized very quickly as I was going through this process is A lot of times these decisions are out of people's hands directly, and it takes resources to acquire resources. And so what winds up happening is, especially in the nonprofit realm, people who don't have the ability to pay high price grant writing often find themselves disadvantaged in that they don't have money now and they don't have help. Their programs are potentially going to fail because they're going to be underfunded for the people who probably need them the most. And their only solution is to try to take money they don't have to hope that they can be granted or gifted some money from people who do have it. And so in order to accomplish that, people tend to need help to get there. And so it's that help that we hope to bring at a cost that makes sense, just because excuse me, just because what we want to see is more people who need the money get the money.
Now, when you're advising clients for potential grants, what is the balance that you impart to clients about kind of the local type of granting organizations who might have more attachment or affinity to the organization and the purpose versus maybe major corporations, organizations who have the funds, but not so much the local attachment and also connection with that organization?
So that's a good question. So what I tend to do is recommend a kind of a blitz where initially what you're doing is you're going for the low-hanging fruit that is available in the community. And that's not meant to be any disrespect to those grant makers in the community who have 5,000 or 2,000 or 10,000 to give. You know, they're all important dollars, but you take those, you establish a relationship and a track record. You keep those lines open, and you take all the 5,000s that you can get your hands on. And in the meantime, you work on your outside development strategy. When I mean outside of the community, simultaneously. So what I would do, or what I would recommend, is that you're getting your money inside of the community that may be small amounts, but you're not relying on it solely so that you're putting so much stress on the smaller institutions, nor are you hoping, by putting all of your eggs in the same basket in terms of going after the $100,000 grant that's, a national competition that you're going to spend a lot of time and maybe not be awarded, and you have to be okay with that. So you have to, choose your battle, be willing to be flexible. Sometimes, while I do understand that people are concerned with scope creep. I do think that if you see a trend in what grant makers are funding, that you should consider modifying your program to match that trend. Not just one person's grant application, but if there's something that you can do to make yourself more competitive, either locally or nationally, then do that. And again, consider. Don't make the choice. It can be a both and. You don't have to apply solely for small grants or solely for large grants or solely for local grants or solely for national grants, but you do have to have the time and the expertise. And if you don't have that on your own, find someone. If it's not us, find someone, because one of the challenges that we get a lot is that some executive director puts their time and resources into writing a grant that's maybe out of their wheelhouse, and then they don't get it, and they're frustrated, and they think that there's a problem with grants. The grants don't work, or they can't write them simply because maybe they weren't abreast on the best practices, they didn't seek help, they're unfamiliar generally with the process. Any other questions?
Oh, I'll ask one more question. What do you do in situations where you're advising clients to pursue a grant, and maybe a large grant or something very impactful, but at the same time you know of or you've heard that it might upset current funders? How is it that you recommend handling that balance to your clients?
Have a plan, have a talk and have a plan. What I mean is, if you have to know that there are some instances, especially for me, I work with a lot of faith-based organizations, and I know that by taking some people's money, some other people are not going to want to give their money, and that you have to weigh that out. You have to, assuage people, let them know that you might find yourself in a situation that makes one source more meaningful than another. And so don't mind the fact that you might lose a funder, even if it's a long-term relationship, if it opens doors, but you have to make sure that you're weighing that correctly.
Did we have any other questions for this? All right, well, not seeing anyone, we are actually close to our time. I wanted to thank you immensely for speaking today, talking to us about it. It's not something, immediately you think of in grant writing as being a catalyst for social change, social justice, equity measures, and so forth. But we saw your organization, we thought, okay, this is definitely the organization that actually is making sure that mission occurs, that grant making is matching up with what resources are available to help out the social justice measure and so forth. I would also like to give a shout out. So Pierce Consulting as well. You are accredited by the Better Business Bureau, and you're actually ranked in the top 10% of organizations. And with my experience with grant writing, your costs are actually some of the best there are. So, again, we're not into promoting commercial enterprises, but I do have to say the affordability of this Pierce Consulting is something that's really unmatched in our experience. So I just want to ask, did you have any other closing remarks you'd like to bring in, Dr. Pierce?
No, I'll just say again, best of luck to anyone doing this work. It's very important work, and I hope to participate in these kind of fora for the foreseeable future. I'm always available if there's questions. I'm available for work if you know someone doing work or struggling trying to acquire grants, even if that person feels like they can't afford a grant writer or, whatever the case is. Please do, refer them to us, even if it's just for advice. That this work is very important. It can't be done by, just a few people, and that opportunities, organizations like yours and these kind of webinars, I think, are very, very helpful in educating people as to, how to best accomplish these goals. And I appreciate having been invited, and I appreciate the opportunity to explain kind of my passion, and I hope that we continue to stay in touch.
Well, we really do appreciate your service in this. For all individuals hoping for the recording in about an hour or so, if you go to the webinar's webpage, which is calgreenacademy.org/ and then SSS, we'll have that posted. And again, I want to thank you, Dr. Pierce, for speaking before us. This was greatly appreciated and much needed, especially in today's social environments.
Thank you so much. You have a great day.
Oh, you too. Thank you so much.